It's BYU, it's Oklahoma State, a big matchup in Provo on Friday night. Wintry conditions could be in the mix. We're talking about all of it ahead on a Locked On crossover edition between Locked On Cougars and Locked On Oklahoma State.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Oklahoma State your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who like to call everydayers right here on both of these great podcasts, and hope you guys will be with us all week long as you get ready for BYU and Oklahoma State. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Today, you go to FanDuel.com, cast a $5 bet, get $200 in bonus bets back guaranteed. It's all courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel. All right, well, please welcome in now Cody Stovall, the host of Locked On Oklahoma State. Cody, I want to start here. Weather conditions in Provo. We have a winter storm advisory coming in on Thursday night, rolling into Friday night ahead of this game between Oklahoma State and BYU. How prepared are the Cowboys to deal with potential snow in the forecast?
Brother man, snow is probably the least of our issues at this very moment. We're still trying to field a competent football team. When you look offensively and defensively, we've not been able to really do one of both, right? So
okay,
there's clearly going to be an emphasis on getting something squared away. I don't know exactly what that is. From what I've gathered, the emphasis is going to be defensively. So as long as there's a time and possession kind of medium there, right, that makes it make sense. I don't know, man. I'm trying to find fun ways to think that the Cowboys could potentially get this done, but BYU's cruising. It being on a Friday, I think, is good for national eyeballs. I don't know that that's great for Oklahoma State, but we are coming off a bye week, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal. I'm a little concerned, man. We haven't been able to establish the run game, and if the weather is going to be slightly precarious, you're not going to be able to sling the pigskin all over the ball, especially with a backup quarterback. So the weather, I don't know. It probably is going to be some sort of a factor, but I'm trying to pretend that it's not going to be as big of a deal.
Now, you mentioned the fact there could be a backup quarterback in the mix. We've heard rumors out there that Garrett Rangel could be in line to start this game. Give me a sense, give Locked On Cougars fans a sense. Where do things stand right now? Is it Alan Bowman? Is it Rangel? Is it somebody else that could be playing this position?
Well, so I've been in the Garrett Rangel camp since basically preseason, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been somewhat in the minority, obviously. Mike Gundy disagrees, but I've thought this whole time Garrett Rangel offered more of a ceiling than Alan Bowman. This whole time, he was a former ESPN and 247 four-star recruit that came to Oklahoma State over a lot of other offers. The problem is he came in at 180 pounds. It's taken him a few years to get up to 212, 215-ish. It's where he is now. He does have a better arm than Alan Bowman, but, he has gotten the opportunity to play a few times, and it's been very underwhelming thus far, I must admit. But Garrett Rangel does provide something that Alan Bowman doesn't, and that's the ability to run. Why we have been running the RPO with Alan Bowman, I don't know. But now if we're going to run the RPO with a Garrett Rangel or a Milwaukee Smith or even a Zane Flores, we're hearing rumors that he might actually suit up. We'll see. All three of those guys are more mobile options than Alan Bowman, so I would expect that to be a part of this game plan for Garrett Rangel.
Now, you mentioned the name Milwaukee Smith. BYU fans are well aware of him because essentially it came down to BYU and Oklahoma State in his recruitment process. It'd be kind of a funny thing if he ends up seeing time, if not starting this game, be kind of an interesting turnaround that quickly to see him play against a team that he was heavily considering, speaking of BYU, when he was coming out of high school.
Well, and you guys know, right, more than anybody else, really, the athletic ability he has kind of speaks for itself, right? He's, I think, second all time. He broke a lot of Tom Brady's records at Juniper Sierra High School. He walked in the building at 6'4", 207 pounds. And so athletically, he is going to be able to provide something a little bit different. And as that stands, I wouldn't be too surprised if we see Milwaukee, or if the reports are true that Zane is potentially going to suit up. Those two dudes, I think, will get some time at maybe a 4th and 1 red zone style of packaging. At least it makes a lot of sense to me.
Now, for the life of me, you mentioned the fact that the running game has been struggling getting going for Oklahoma State. how in the world is Ollie Gordon not like just going beast mode? Is it the offensive line just not been good enough? What is going on with their run game?
Yeah, dude. So you look back at some of the film stuff, and there was a stretch. There were a couple games where it looked like Ollie Gordon was being far less patient. He wasn't utilizing his vision like he did last year, and it was causing him to kind of run into the backs of his offensive linemen instead of find the holes. And then I did some more digging, right? It's the beauty of this job. And then I found out that he's getting hit in the backfield almost 53% of the time. Yeah, dude. Exactly. So I don't care who you are, right? You do have to break tackles, but if you look again, statistically, he's good at breaking tackles. But when you're getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, over half the time you get the ball before you ever even, have the opportunity to get going, I don't care who you are, it's difficult to stop. So, yes, teams have been loading the box for one. And number two is the offensive linemen have not been doing very good at all. They've been one of the worst, if not the worst in the country, 2 years in a row at PFF grades for run protection.
Okay. Mike Gundy this week says that he got headbutted by a cow. Are we buying that excuse?
Well, unfortunately, it didn't seem to knock any sense into him, because ever since he got hit in the head with the cow, he's been talking about crazy stuff and third string dudes that are hurt potentially playing and this and that and the other. It's just, I don't know, man. I think Mike Gundy needs to be in concussion protocol, because I don't know that he's making a whole lot of sense.
Well, he's a guy who's been around a long time, and it was just such a funny thing on Monday to hear him say, "Hey, this press conference, we're not doing it because I got a bloodshot eye, and I just don't. It doesn't make for a pretty face." And I got to admit, I was laughing pretty hard at that.
Well, it's better than the alternative, right? I didn't get hit in the head with a cow, but I may need to be sponsored by Jack Daniels the more I keep watching this particular football team. It's killing me, man.
Yeah,
this has been the most devastating year for expectations of my lifetime. And again, I got season tickets in '97, been going to games since '94, and this is just the most anticipatory season of all time. Jake, 20 returning starters and 90% of the roster, and we're doing nothing. And I am getting, as you can tell, got kind of frustrated at this point in time with Mike Gundy, our fearless leader. He's the dude that's in all of the memes while the house is on fire. He's sitting there typing, saying everything's fine. It is maddening. It is frustrating. You do see teams out there acknowledging the fact that they have major issues midseason. So what do? They fire coaches. They demote coaches. They promote coaches. Mm-hmm. We're not doing any of that, at least not publicly. So we'll see. I do think that Mike Gundy is currently suffering from a concussion. But that actually could be a good thing, dude, because I don't know if you noticed, but the play calling recently hasn't been too great. So maybe, right, if we don't know what day it is, our play calling will become more creative. I'm a fan.
Hey, that very well may be the case. All right, I'm going to
go cows and go Cougs.
I'm going to let Cody flip the tables and ask me questions, because you talk about a team that's underachieving relative to expectations. Got to admit, BYU's overachieving relative to their expectations. We'll let Cody ask his questions, what he wants to know about BYU, coming up next as this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Oklahoma State rolls on. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, we talk about FanDuel often here on these podcasts, and of course, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and for good reason, because right now, NFL fans, really any other sports fan, you can get started with a big return with our friends at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook once again. They're offering you guys an incredible offer, and we'll get to that momentarily. But I want to remind you guys that when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, maybe it's Friday night between Oklahoma State and BYU, with the Cougars favored by more than a touchdown in this one from our friends at FanDuel. You can both check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're casting those bets. And the best part is, once again, a special offer. You'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet with FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com to learn more and get started today. That's FanDuel.com. And once again, they are America's #1 sportsbook. Continuing on now on a crossover edition with Locked On Cougars and Locked On Oklahoma State. And Cody, here's the thing about BYU. I'm sure Oklahoma State fans are familiar with the Cougars as a whole, but what's the familiarity with Provo? What do you got for us? What do you guys need to know ahead of this matchup on Friday night?
Nah, dude, this has been honestly on my bucket list since I was a kid, watching Ty Dittmer and then seeing some of the Steve Young highlights back in the day, right? So this is a big one, I think, for just any college football fan, whether you're Oklahoma State, Big 12, doesn't matter. This is a style of atmosphere and the game that you want to go to. I unfortunately just found out yesterday from a doctor I will not be going, so I have tickets for no reason.
Oh,
dude,
man.
It is what it is. But you mentioned in the first segment what questions would I have, and my only question would be how, right? Not my Native American how, even though they do call me Chief Kick-a-Chick. I want to know, how does BYU get here? Because I even chastised Kalani Setaki for getting virtually nobody in the transfer portal. Well, how do you have a below 500 team and you don't feel like you need to address anything? Well, it turns out Kalani Setaki is a lot smarter than me, because Kalani Setaki knew he had everything he needed in the room. Therefore, he didn't really need to go get a whole heck of a lot, and he has proven that. Because whenever you look statistically, Jake, BYU is only first place in the Big 12 in one category out of like 37. But yet they're leading the Big 12, right? When you go look at sacks and tackles and all of that stuff, there's a lot of times where BYU is not even in the top 25. So it goes to more of a team approach. Obviously, you don't have a Trey Rucker or a Nick Martin that is getting every single tackle on the field. What you have is a bunch of dudes that play together and they share the statistics. So you don't have like a Nick Martin or a Trey Rucker, but you don't need it statistically because your team plays so freaking good together. Kalani Setaki has built a remarkable product down in Provo. So let me again ask, with not bringing very many people into the transfer portal after a very inadequate season last year, how did BYU know that they had everything they needed to produce this product?
I'll be frank. I was with you because I looked at it and said, okay, with how things went a season ago, you probably need to bring in some reinforcements. But as you mentioned, these are coaches that are being paid the big bucks to make these decisions. Apparently, they're much smarter than we are as podcasters. But yeah, I know exactly. But Kalani has talked about the fact that they felt like the year previous, so going into their first year in the Big 12, they turned over more than half this roster, Cody. They brought in more than 60 players. That was guys coming home off of LDS missions, transfer portal, high school signees, JUCO guy, across the board. They turned over more than half the roster. And they felt like all that upheaval actually led to more of what they experienced in that 5-7 season than what has happened this year. This year, they bet on continuity. They decided, you know what? We're going to essentially take the guys we have. We're going to train him up, put him through a rigorous offseason workout, do all the things we need to do, we feel like, to be more successful. And as you mentioned, it's paid off. You mentioned the fact that they're not necessarily standing out in any one particular statistical category, but if you look across the board, they're pretty good in all of the categories.
Yes,
you mentioned the team approach. It is a team approach. Yes, Jake Retzlaff has had some really good performances on offense, with the running game still very much in flux with all the injuries they've endured at running back. Offensive line has dealt with its own injuries, but they continue to have guys step up and step into the roles that they need to fill and do them quite admirably. On defense, you talk about what they've done is they've got 11 guys that are really just getting after it. Whoever's out there on the field, they know that, hey, I got to do my 111th. We talk about this all the time in football, about doing your 111th. Well, guess what? BYU's kind of living the epitome of that this year. Their defensive guys, I don't necessarily think any of them are super big names. I think there's two emerging forces at linebacker in Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker, but they're not household names yet. They're not the Fred Warners or the Kyle Van Noys that BYU's had in the past. Maybe down the road they become that, but right now, I'll just sum it up by saying this. The sum total of the parts is why BYU is 6-0 and sitting atop the conference at 3-0 currently.
Well, and I think the thing that we could all revert back to on this, like, to be the storyline of all of this, is we bet on continuity and we got a disastrous product. You bet on continuity, and Kalani Setaki looks like an absolute genius. And I think you could argue the same for Iowa State. So you had Oklahoma State, Iowa State, BYU, and West Virginia, and KU, all returning over 84% of their rosters. Yet some of us look like we're completely inept, and some of us look like this is exactly what we were building for. Dude, Iowa State just quietly, silently, very ugly, just keeps winning ball games.
Yeah.
And here's BYU, the team that decided not to get anybody in the transfer portal. It's so crazy that we all five decided to do the same thing based off of continuity and consistency inside the locker rooms. yet you're getting a completely different product from the team that had the most continuity and the most returning starters on the offensive line, the second most in BCS, or I'm sorry, playoff era history.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's got to come down to coaching, correct?
Yeah, you think coaching is absolutely a part of it. I also do think that there's no, I guess, real linear path to success in college football. I'm going to invoke the ACC in this discussion. Look at Clemson. Trust me, I am among the people that out there think that Dabo Swinney has got it completely backwards, thinking he doesn't bring anybody in the transfer portal, doesn't care to, speaks out against it all the time. Right. But Clemson all of a sudden is starting to win again, and maybe it's the fact that, hey, he's betting on bringing his guys, getting them into the Clemson model of things, and it's going to yield success. I don't think there's any particular path that's perfect. BYU decided to go with continuity, and it's worked out great. You mentioned the fact you guys had 20 returning starters for Oklahoma State. I had Oklahoma State on my short list of Big 12 contenders this year. I also had Utah there. Well, there's two different storylines there. Utah has been beset by injuries. Obviously, Cam Rising going down has hurt them. With Oklahoma State, yeah, there's probably a coaching element to this because really, you look at the talent that Oklahoma State has. If you were to go man for man on paper with BYU, I would give the edge to Oklahoma State almost at every position, just man for man, athlete to athlete, because I just think they've got that much talent there. So, yeah, I guess in the case of Oklahoma State, it comes down to coaching, but I add the caveat that I don't think there's a particular path that every program can walk that's going to say that's going to be success.
I don't know, man. You are right. With the transfer portal era, you don't know. You have people like Dabo and Mike Gundy that don't really mess with the portal a whole lot, and then you have people like Dion that feel like that his entire life is, circulating within the portal. So, and you are seeing Colorado have success, right? It's maybe a little bit of a rough patch. Maybe they had to iron some things out, get whatever it was, or get the locker room squared away a little bit more. But now you're having a team that is nothing but transfers produce. And then you have a team like Oklahoma State that didn't really go get any transfers. Yeah. It's maddening, dude. It's maddening.
And I can understand that because, trust me, BYU last year, there was a lot of excitement going into the Big 12 because the Cougars, they essentially had a 2-year lead-in to get ready for this, Cody. Like, they essentially recruited as such. They had 2 years to get ready for it. And in many respects, Cougar fans felt like they fell flat on their face because they started the season 4-1. They got to 5-2, and then they ended up losing the 5 straight games to end the season. Obviously, that heartbreaker out there in Stillwater on the final weekend of the season.
Hey, I wasn't there for that one.
It broke a lot of Cougar hearts that day. Let's just put it that way, in double overtime, to miss out on a bowl game. And I think it left a bad taste in Cougar fans' mouths, and it really kind of lasted the entire offseason. We heard from the players and coaches all offseason in Provo saying, hey, we've been working hard, we believe in ourselves, and you and I both know this, doing as long as we have, that, okay, is that all just like coach speak? You guys just trying to make yourselves feel better, or is it going to legitimately lead to results on the field? And I think that the storylines between these two programs, speaking of Oklahoma State and BYU coming into this matchup, in one case, it's worked out. And all the talk in the offseason that those players and coaches put out there from BYU side, well, they've backed it up. Whereas Oklahoma State, yeah, it's not necessarily been living up to the expectations they all had. And it's unfortunate, but I guess the good news is, if I'm speaking to Oklahoma State fans for a moment, is there's still opportunity. The back half of the season is here. I know it was an 0-3 run leading into the bye week, but guess what? Now it's time to turn it around, hopefully.
Dude, I've lost more money betting on Oklahoma State this year than the last 4 years combined. I'm not even joking. It's just, dude, the disillusionment that I guess I was allowed to let sink in. And what it was in the spring and the fall, like, we looked phenomenal, but caveat, it turns out the reason we looked phenomenal is because our offensive line was completely in over their skis. So in the spring and the fall, our D-line got enough pressure that our back end secondary looked amazing, right? Yeah. Because Brian Nardo does want to play a lot of man isolation, who's guys' best style of aggressive defense. And the defensive line, if they don't get any push, then you're screwing your guys in the back end, and that's what's been happening. But we have brought somebody into the fold at least the last week and a half for practice that, spent 6 years as a DC in the SEC, and his familiarity is with the 4-3 defense. So I would assume that we are working on some different layers of implementing more 4-3 than 3-3-5 this week. We'll see.
All right, well, that should be interesting. Something to look for Cougar fans as they go out to this game. All right, we'll wrap up this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Oklahoma State momentarily. We got to get some predictions in. We got to get some thoughts on this matchup on Friday night. We'll get to that momentarily right here on both of these great programs. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at excuse me, I apologize. I screwed that up there. Over at Hims. And of course, Hims is here for you guys when it comes to your sexual wellness. Now, we all talk about all the time. You probably hear a million ads for all things ED out there. But the good news is our friends at Hims want to help you guys out, perform better no matter what it is in your life. And the best part is it's time to stop worrying about your performance and get Hims so you can feel confident knowing you can get everything you need taken care of when the moment hits. Hims is changing males' healthcare by helping you with access to affordable sexual health treatments for the comfort of your couch. They offer you an access of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints, Viagra, and Cialis, and also their generics are up to 95% off of their price. And the best part is it's 100% online, so to have that awkward visit, going to the doctor's office and being with a doctor you don't know and having to talk about such things. The best part about it, no insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care with our friends at Hims. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options today. HIMS.com/lockedon one more time. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See the website for details and important safety information, and subscription is required, and price varies based on product and subscription plan. But once again, that's hims.com/lockedon. All right, final stanza of today's Locked On Cougars and Locked On Oklahoma State crossover. And Cody, looking forward to this matchup because I think BYU, and I talked with Connor Pay, who I have on my show. He's a team captain for BYU every week, and he admitted that there is a bit of a payback feeling for BYU coming off of that game a season ago out there in Stillwater. It was heartbreaking for that team to miss out on a bowl game and come that close to getting that elusive sixth win. What's the mindset of Oklahoma State? You've talked about the fact that you're concerned about the coaching and the like, but what's the mindset of the team as they come into this matchup against the Cougars?
I think the team is equally as perplexed as the fan base is on how this season has gone. Because that's the thing, man. Whenever you bring back virtually 90% of your roster and you do have all those offensive linemen that have, 220 starts amongst them, the reason that you get all of those dudes to come back is to play for trophies. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Like, you don't bring back 20 returning starters to compete for the Insight.com Bowl. That's not what you do. So I'm sure the players are equally as frustrated, right? And you have some of them. Mike Gundy mentions this all the time, and I don't know that he should have, right? Because he has said repeatedly, this is a business. Eventually, these guys are basically just going to be employees of the school. Well, he said that so many times that eventually the players have to start saying, you know what? Mike Gundy's right. This is a business, and business is bad. The company that we're working for doesn't really seem like they're willing to do anything to fix it. So, yeah, when things like this happen, this is why the transfer portal sometimes gets out of hand. It's because you have the head coach basically smoke and mirrors the whole country, acting like everything's fine, and he doesn't really care what the fan base has to say. You keep doing that, eventually you're just going to get people beyond frustrated, and I think that naturally seeps into the locker room. Now, is it enough to cause problems? Maybe not. We saw it with Spencer Sanders and all that saga in 2022. I do believe that the players, by and large, believe more in Garrett Rangel than they do in Alan Bowman. So I do think that you're going to see a little bit more of an inspired effort from the Cowboys, at least offensively. And then defensively, if what we're working on is, if it works, then it'll be a competitive ball game. The one thing I will say, I wouldn't say confident, but this is the first time I felt a little bit of, okay, we could probably win this ball game in the last 3 weeks. And it's only because of the injection of Garrett Rangel into the offense. He does add a different layer, and then you have more athletic quarterbacks behind him. And then defensively, if we're going to try to base things up a little bit more old school, as we have the size and speed of SEC dudes, but this 3-3-5 with Nardo, it's not been working. So if we're going through an oversimplification method defensively, we might be able to keep this thing pretty close. I have more confidence that we could potentially win this game than the last 3. I don't think we're going to win, right? But I think that it actually could be close because of the excitement and the injection of some of the new pieces offensively and defensively.
Okay, you mentioned Garrett Rangel's name. Are there maybe 2 or 3 other guys BYU fans should be aware of in this matchup?
Well, so our best receiver is DeJon Stribling. And honestly, if we had a quarterback that could distribute him the ball better, he would be – I mean, he's in the Blitnikoff Award race, but barely. And that's not his fault. So we want to see a little bit more of DeJon Stribling because him and Brendan Presley do have NFL capabilities, right? They might both be later round guys. But he needs to kind of put a little bit more on film to help his draft stock. And again, I don't know that the timing with him and Garrett Rangel is great, but I do know the timing between Talon Shetron and Garrett Rangel is phenomenal. So from a wide receiver perspective, you guys know who Brendan Presley is. You didn't get to see DeJon Stribling last year because he was injured. I think you saw a little bit of Talon Shetron. Yeah. So I would pay attention to those individuals. And then in the running back room, there's been an emphasis to get Sesi Vailahe off and running, and he was a BYU consideration as well. So that name will be familiar to you guys. But because of the ineptitude of the offensive line, he hasn't been able to get going either. But I would think that we're going to try to stretch the field a little bit more. So keep an eye on Sesi Vailahe, number 3, getting more involved in the offense.
Now, I'll just speak from the BYU side offensively. Cowboy fans, you'll want to get to know him, Jake Retzlaff. He played against Oklahoma State last year. He went 0-4 last year as a starter, and the final game was that double overtime loss to Oklahoma State. He's got him off to a 6-0 start. And considering every running back, I'm telling you, Cody, every running back BYU has played this season has gotten injured at some point. We're talking 5 of them.
That's wild.
It's kind of crazy. But the good news is,
but you keep winning.
I know, they keep winning.
Keep winning.
So you'll want to know the name LJ Martin. Speaking of the running backs, he's the stud. He's the bell cow, for lack of a better term, on that offense. You talk about the wide receivers for Oklahoma State. BYU's got a 2-man tandem in Chase Roberts and Darius Lassiter, who have been absolutely lights out at wide receiver this year for BYU, and they're expected to have big games if BYU wants to win Friday night.
Dude, Chase Roberts, outside of Teteroa McMillan, is my favorite wide receiver to watch in the Big 12. Honestly.
He's a fan favorite. There's no doubt about it. He's a good player. The best part, he's a local kid. He literally grew up 20 minutes north of where BYU is located in American Fork, Utah. So he's a true hometown kid putting on for his hometown university. It's a really cool story.
That is phenomenal. I absolutely love that.
All right. Well, Cody, you got a score prediction for us before we go out the door here?
Yeah, I'm going to say the Cougs get or did, but I do think it's actually going to be close this go around. So, and the weather I think is going to play some sort of a factor. Yeah. So I'll say 28-24 BYU Cougs.
Okay, I was thinking something similar. I had BYU 31, Oklahoma State 23. So I think we're kind of in the same ballpark there. I do think the weather might keep it down a little bit. The biggest thing is I think the 2 ground games, both of them a little iffy so far through the first 6 games for both of these programs, could play a big role. Whoever can get that going in this game with wet weather, snow, whatever it's going to end up being Friday night could play a role. But Cody, always good to catch up with you, man. Where can everybody find your fine work if we're Cougar fans want to find out more about Oklahoma State?
Yeah, just the daily Locked On Oklahoma State show. I do some stuff traveling, 7-on-7 high school recruiting as well for Prospect Sports. So keep an eye on that. As far as socials go, X is at All Day O State, and then it's all O State all day on all the other socials that I clearly use so much.
All right, awesome. Well, if Cowboy fans, you want to find me, I'm at Jacob C. Hatch, my personal handle, but you can find Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube, all the different podcast platforms, and we are also on social media with the podcast. It's Locked On Cougars on X. It's also on Facebook and Instagram as well. Cody, as always, a pleasure to catch up with you, my man. We'll do this again down the road, hopefully.
Hey, brother, what you don't know is this has been a long time coming for me. So before I got this job, I watched you, Josh Neighbors, and then I watched a little bit of Drake. So I've been watching you before I was ever even doing this thing. So this is a full circle moment for me. And instead of going and having myself a drink, I'll leave that for Friday because I'm sure Mike Gundy's going to leave me a lot. Matter of fact, before I skedaddle on off of here, Mike Gundy makes enough money that I think that this year he should wholesale pay for everybody's AA meetings if you're an Oklahoma State fan. I feel like that's fair after this year.
He'd be able to take care of it if he wanted to. He probably should consider that, no doubt about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
All right, Cody. Well, hey, original everydayer. I appreciate that, my man. But hey, we'll catch up with you again soon, all right?
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, brother.
All right, once again, thank you for making Locked On Oklahoma State and Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.